LIBRA. The 7-year cycle ends now. What does the last phase of June hold for you? There's something strange that happens to Libras in the middle of the year. It's not an event. It's not a visible crisis. It's more like a discomfort that doesn't yet have a name. That feeling that something inside you has changed address without warning. You wake up one day in June and realize that certain things that once made sense now seem too heavy. Certain people, certain routines, certain versions of yourself. And you don't know exactly when this started happening. Most people call it tiredness, or a crisis, or a sign that it's time for a change. But for Libra, there's something more precise happening, something that astrology describes with disturbing accuracy, and that I want to show you today because after you understand it, the feeling that's been accompanying you this month will take on a completely different form. For Libra, June is not just the middle of the year, it's the turning point of a 7-year cycle. Saturn is presenting the bill, not cruelly, but with a clarity that asks no permission. What you're about to discover is deeper and more disturbingly familiar than anyone predicted. Stay until the end. There is a cycle, invisible but absolutely real. A 7-year cycle that structures Libra's life in layers of construction, collapse, and renewal. And this June for you marks the end of one of those cycles. It's not the beginning of something new, the end of an entire era. I know this might sound abstract, but bear with me for a moment. Think about who you were 7 years ago, not the version you present to the world, the real inner version. What were you building back then? What kind of relationships were you maintaining? What kind of life were you trying to build? And most importantly, what were you avoiding looking at? Because Libra has this gift and this burden. The gift of seeing harmony in everything, and the burden of sometimes fabricating this harmony where it doesn't exist. Of smiling while swallowing something. Of balancing when it should, in fact, let it fall. And the 7-year cycle, this great invisible architect, doesn't forgive this tendency. It accumulates. It records every postponed choice, every conflict softened too much, every time the scales were forced into an equilibrium that wasn't true. And when the cycle comes to an end, it presents the bill, not as punishment, as clarity. Saturn, the planet that governs these cycles, is not cruel. It is precise. It doesn't take away what shouldn't be with you, but it removes what has been kept out of habit, out of fear, out of that silent need Libra has to never displease, never unbalance, never be the reason why something falls apart. And that's exactly what you're feeling now, in this last phase of June. It's not the world crumbling. It's your manufactured version of balance beginning to crack. But here's what makes this even more profound. This cycle didn't start now. It's been 7 years. And if you stop, really stop, and look at what was happening in your life back then, you'll recognize the exact moment it began. It might have been a move to a new city, a relationship that started or ended, a career decision that seemed courageous at the time, but was actually a way to escape something you couldn't name. It might have been a loss, an achievement that came with a price you only understood much later. What Saturn does is take that initial moment, that 0 point, and build 7 years of lessons upon it. Not in a linear way, not in an obvious way. It operates behind the scenes, adjusting your choices, presenting the same situations in slightly different ways, until you learn what you need to learn. Until you see the pattern. And Libra, more than any other sign, has a very specific pattern that Saturn insists on revealing. The difference between real balance and what is perceived as balance. Built and what was only maintained so as not to displease. It was while searching for answers to these questions that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. It's not an astrology manual. It's something different. It's a mirror. A place where the language of the cosmos transforms into practical questions about who you chose to be, what you accepted that you shouldn't have accepted, and what you can still build from what remains after the cycle has removed what wasn't essential. For Libra, who spends their entire life trying to maintain balance around themselves, this book offers something that goes in the opposite direction. It invites you to find balance within yourself first. And you are in this exact moment right now, with the cycle coming to an end, with the feeling that something needed to crumble so that you could finally see what was underneath. This discomfort you're carrying in this last phase of June isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that you're ready for the next layer, and it's precisely in this state, still processing, still feeling, that this type of content has the most power. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And you, Libra, if you look back at the last 7 years of your life, what do you see that you've built without realizing it? Tell us in the comments. Because there's something Libra rarely admits to herself. She knows when the balance is false. She feels the weight hidden beneath the plateau. But harmony is so important to her that she prefers to pretend the scales are level rather than admit she's carrying something she shouldn't be carrying. That's the price of a balance that isn't real. And for 7 years, Saturn has been recording every time you did this. Every smile cost more than it seemed. Every "it's okay" that wasn't true. Every version of yourself that was built to please, to soften, to not be the problem. And now he presents this list, not as an accusation, as an invitation for you to look and decide, what here is truly mine? What do I carry because it's mine? And what do I carry because I never had the courage to give it back? This question is at the heart of this end of a cycle, and it doesn't have an easy answer, especially for Libra, who has been taught by life, by relationships, by the very nature of their sign, that the solution always lies in compromise, in consensus, in agreement. But Saturn doesn't accept compromise. It wants to know what is real. And this is where the most beautiful and most unsettling paradox of this entire phase arises. For Libra to achieve true balance in the next cycle, it needs to accept the imbalance now. You need to let some things fall. You need to be, for a while, the reason for discomfort, your own, perhaps others. Not out of cruelty, out of honesty. Think about how a renovation works. Before you can have a new house, one that truly reflects who you are now, you need to tear down what was there. Walls that made sense when they were built, but now divide the space incorrectly. Finishes that were beautiful at the time, but have aged poorly. Plumbing that worked, but with effort, with small leaks that you ignored. Patching on the surface, covering up with whatever you had on hand. The renovation isn't the problem, it's the solution. But it makes noise, it makes dust, it looks ugly for a while. And those looking from the outside won't necessarily understand what you're building, because a construction project in progress never looks exactly like what it will become. Libra, in this last phase of June, is in the midst of a project. What was cracked inside has finally surfaced. What was ignored for years has demanded attention more urgently. And it's natural, completely natural, that it seems chaotic. That it seems like everything is wrong when in fact everything is being reorganized to become more right than ever before. And now we arrive at the point that nobody likes to face, but which this Libra cycle has made impossible to avoid. The difference between what you chose and what you accepted, because they are not the same thing. Choosing implies awareness, will, evaluation. Accepting may simply mean not having resisted enough, not having believed that you deserved to question, not having had the energy to negotiate what needed to be negotiated. Saturn insists on showing this difference. 7 years of choices and acceptance have been catalogued, and at the close of this cycle, you have the opportunity, unique and genuinely rare, to sort through everything. What remains here has been chosen, or has it simply not been discarded? It's not an easy question. For Libra, who has an almost supernatural ability to see the good side of any situation, this distinction can be especially difficult. Because you've always found a way to make sense of what's present, a way to create harmony even where it wasn't intentionally built. But creating harmony from what's there isn't the same as building the life you want. It's an extraordinary skill. But when used excessively, it can also be a way of never asking what you really want to build from scratch. This end of a cycle is an invitation to ask this question, not to destroy what has been built, but to look honestly and decide what is worth taking into the next cycle and what can be gently left behind. Imagine a musician who has finished playing a long and complex piece. He is still holding the last note, fingers on the frets, the bow across the strings, the resonance still alive in the air. Until he releases that note, the next piece cannot begin. Not because he doesn't know the next melody, but because the instrument is still committed to the previous sound. LIBRA, in this last phase of June, is in this position. The music of the last 7 years is still resonating. It's still in your fingers, in your muscle memory, in how you react, how you choose, how you position yourself in your relationships. And the question this end of a cycle poses is simple and devastating at the same time. Will you continue holding on to this note to avoid facing the silence? Or will you let go and discover that silence is not emptiness, but preparation? The moment Libra finally breathes and lets the note die is the moment something new becomes possible. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with that quiet clarity that only comes when you stop forcing it. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose speaks precisely to this moment, the instant between what was and what has yet to be formed. For Libra, who lives in the tension between the two sides of the scale, learning to inhabit this transitional space without collapsing is one of the most profound achievements the cycle can offer. This book won't tell you what to do. It will show you who you already are when you stop trying to balance the world around you and begin to listen to what is asking for balance within you. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And then silence comes, not as absence, as openness. June is drawing to a close, and with it, this specific phase of the astral configuration that has pressed Libra to see itself more clearly. But before the new cycle begins, there is something that needs to be understood. What this cycle demanded of you was not your time or your energy. It was your illusion. The illusion that it was possible to keep everything in balance without losing yourself. The illusion that caring for others was the same as caring for yourself. The illusion that the harmony you built around you was a reflection of who you really are, when in fact it was often a shield, a way of avoiding having to answer the harder questions about what you want, what makes you feel good, what makes you feel bad, what you tolerated for too long. Saturn isn't sentimental. It registers what was built with solidity and what was built with fear. And in this last phase of June, it's showing Libra the difference. Not so that you blame yourself, but so that you finally know how to distinguish between them. Because here's what nobody tells you about 7-year cycles. They don't end with losses. They end with revelations. And the biggest revelations usually come in the last months of the cycle, when the accumulated pressure finally finds a way out. When what has been forcibly maintained for the past few years begins to dissolve because it simply can no longer bear the weight of its upkeep. What was draining you? What was consuming energy that should have gone elsewhere? What did you call commitment that was actually exhaustion disguised as loyalty? These are the questions of June, and they are not cruel, they are liberating. Because when you finally manage to name them, you realize that it's not the world that needs to change. It's you who has changed. And the world around you needs to be reorganized to accommodate the version that emerged after 7 years of pressure. There is a very specific beauty in old vineyards. The vines that have endured the harshest winters, that have struggled to find water in difficult soils, that have been rigorously pruned year after year. These are precisely the ones that produce the most complex, profound wines, the wines most full of history, not the vines that grow without difficulty, the ones that have been tempered by adversity. LIBRA, you are that vine. The last 7 years, with all the difficulties, with everything that seemed like it wouldn't work out, with each time the scale tipped more to one side than you wanted, were the necessary conditions for what is within you now to have the depth it has. You didn't emerge from this cycle the same. You emerged more complex, more capable of distinguishing what is superficial from what is essential, more aware of where you put your energy. And perhaps you still can't see this clearly. Perhaps it seems that the balance is still negative, that you've lost more than you've gained. But this perception is exactly what the end of the cycle distorts, because we are looking from the inside, with the dust still in the air. The real harvest will only appear when the new cycle begins to settle in, when you start to use in your daily choices everything you learned without knowing you were learning it. What you gained in this cycle doesn't have an easy name. It's not an achievement you can hang on the wall. It's something more subtle and more lasting, the ability to recognize yourself more honestly, to know a little better where your limit is, to understand, even if still in a hazy way, that balance is not a fixed position. It's a state that needs to be continually rebuilt, honestly, based on what is real. For 7 years, Saturn returns to the sign a more mature version of itself. It's not easier, it's more real. And for Libra, whose fundamental mission is to navigate between opposites, between what it wants and what is asked of it, between what it feels and what it shows, between the harmony it desires and the conflict it sometimes needs to embrace. This more real version is an invaluable gift. It's the ability to stop pretending to be in balance and start inhabiting it. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose touches on this invisible harvest. The way Libra accumulates wisdom that it cannot easily name, but which changes the quality of every choice it makes from now on. This cycle has taught you things that no book could teach, but this book can help you organize them, see them more clearly, and transform accumulated experience into conscious direction. It's for those who are exactly where you are, on the threshold between what was and what is yet to come, wanting to know what to do with everything they carry. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And so we arrive here, at this exact point, the end of an era, the last gasp of a cycle that began 7 years ago with a version of yourself you barely recognize anymore. June is leaving, taking with it the accumulated weight, the manufactured version of balance, the choices made out of fear that are finally being released. And what remains? What remains is the core, that which did not yield even under the most intense pressure. The relationships that survived, not because they were spared conflict, but because they had real substance. The values that were tested and proved to be true. The capacity you developed, not always in a pleasant way, to look at yourself more honestly than you thought you were capable of. The new cycle doesn't begin with fanfare. It doesn't begin with a magical turnaround or a dramatic revelation. It begins with any given morning in July or August when you realize that something is different, that a decision that once seemed complicated now seems clearer, that a conversation that once cost you dearly now flows more naturally, that you are imperceptibly less committed to maintaining something that didn't truly belong to you. This is the gift that the end of the Saturn cycle delivers to Libra, not the absence of complexity, but a more honest relationship with it. Not perfect balance, but the ability to recognize when it is real and when it is a performance. Not an easier life, a life more your own. There is something very quiet and very powerful happening within you in this last phase of June. It's not visible to everyone. Perhaps it's not even visible to you yet. But it is happening. The internal adjustment that Saturn demanded over these 7 years is being completed. The pieces that needed to fall have fallen. The ones that needed to resist have resisted. And what emerges from this is not a different Libra, it's a more whole Libra, more capable of making choices without needing to justify them to everyone, more capable of saying no without spending days agonizing over whether it was the right thing to do, more capable of recognizing before investing too much when a situation isn't going where you need it to go. These are not small skills. For Libra, they are revolutionary because they allow you to use your relational intelligence, your ability to see all sides, your genuine search for harmony, not to serve the needs of others, but to build a life that is, in fact, your own. June has something in store for you, Libra, that you've been waiting for without knowing its name. Not an answer, but clarity. Not an arrival, but the feeling that the ground beneath your feet is, for the first time in a long time, entirely yours. And it is from this clarity, this recovered lightness, this core that has endured, that the next cycle will begin. Not from scratch, from what is real, from what remains after all that was illusion has vanished. And this, more than any dramatic turn of events, is the deepest and most lasting form of new beginning that exists.